Hi, my name is Aaron Mosmeyer. I am an aspiring author and seeker of knowledge. Creative storytelling is varied, but I believe personality is the source. Join me on my journey as we dive deep into the lives of artists and entrepreneurs who create and conquer. And please be sure to check out my latest short story on thevisionariescanvas.com or click the link in the description. My guest today is a screenwriter who has over a decade and a half of experience working in the entertainment industry. He has won and placed in numerous screenwriting competitions and has optioned screenplays for a handful of motion picture production companies. Please welcome Eliot Gerstel. So Eliot, thank you so much for coming out to have this chat. I know we've been talking about doing this podcast for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're my first guest, and here we are.
Excited to be here.
I am too. I'm excited to
Rip into it.
to hear everything you have to say.
Let's rip its head off.
Let's
just
rip the head off right
let's
now.
just solve all the problems writers have out there right now.
Every single one of them. You heard it here, guys. We're gonna do it.
We're
never gonna have a problem ever again.
When you watch this edited down, just the act of watching it will solve all your problems.
I think we're ripping the head off right now.
And if it doesn't, you can email Aaron.
Yeah, just complain to me about it. Yeah. Don't worry about him. He has no social media. So Eliot, can we start by you telling me, what does creativity mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me, creativity is, I'm trying to think of, creativity is, as far as writing and the stuff that I do in screenwriting, it's about doing something new, doing something that's kind of different, but at the same time, something that's somewhat grounded in something people have seen before, somewhat relatable. Because I think there's this idea of creativity could just be the wildest, most free-form jazz thing, which is great. But I think if there's not something that connects to the audience or something that involves people on an emotional level, then it's just, kind of just free form, whatever. So I think that, I think that creativity is about finding a new way to look at something that maybe something that already exists a different way. I kind of think of like the idea of a prism and holding something up and turning it around and finding a new angle on something.
Like
that's always
a unique voice.
Yeah, a unique voice. I think that's always kind of exciting for me when I can kind of find that stuff in my own work, or I can, see it in other work.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about your career and maybe your approach to storytelling?
Yeah. So I'm assuming if they're watching this, they'll know my name. But I'm currently a screenwriter. I've been working in the entertainment industry for about a decade and a half. I went to film school. I always knew, since I was like maybe in eighth grade or whatever, that I wanted to do something with film and visual narrative stuff. I was always, interested in drawing and reading comic books and reading books and that kind of stuff. So I went to film school. I wanted to be a director. And then I kind of realized that if I was a writer, I could do all the fun stuff of directing, like the creative aspect and the storytelling aspect and coming up with scenes and making stories work. And I wouldn't have to wait for a call time or to get an entire crew or the people together, that I could just sort of do it sitting on my computer and do it anytime I wanted. So I moved out to Los Angeles. I grew up in New York City. I moved out to Los Angeles. I got a job working as a reader for a producer who was also a manager, so I read a lot of scripts for him. And then I started working at a motion picture studio, Sony Pictures. I worked in the marketing department there, which was actually great because there's a lot of people that try to get into, it's called development, which is the development of the scripts and the reading and the coverage and that kind of stuff. It's very competitive, but if you're in marketing, you're kind of in the second arm of the creative process of the motion picture, sort of. So you get to read the scripts. You also get to be find out what they're doing as far as development process. You get to see the movies come along. I worked there for about 10 years. Then at a certain point, I decided that if I was going to do this writing thing, that I should really do it. I had sort of been writing on my own, and then I'd sent some stuff out. I got a little bit of traction, and then I had a script that did well in some competitions, and that got me a manager. I was able to option some things. So yeah, that's kind of been my journey.
Can you tell us what the script was?
That got me signed for the manager. Yeah, I had always wanted to tell this story. I'd been Warren Buffett, the investor. There was this scandal that happened with him in the '90s, and I kind of thought it could be a sort of Big Short type of movie. So I worked on that. I'd been working on it for a while, researching it, and then when the pandemic hit, we were all sort of at home. My wife was pregnant. Everybody was kind of working from home, and I kind of had to sit on the couch while my wife is like 6 or 7 months pregnant to kind of be present for her. And she just said, well, why don't you write the script? And it was a great time to do it because, like, as much messed up stuff as was happening in the world, it was kind of quiet. Like you're at home, you kind of had nothing to do. So I wrote it, slogged through it. I sent it out to a competition called the Nichols, which is the Academy Awards screenwriting competitions, like one of the most entered screenwriting competitions. It did well, and then I got signed from a manager off of that script.
So, kind of piggybacking off of that, the Warren Buffett story
Mm-hmm.
was an inspiration for
Yeah.
the script.
Yeah.
What are some of your biggest inspirations in general?
Right. So I think what I kind of respond to, and whenever I'm developing a script, is I need or I have an idea for a script. It's hard to say which kind of comes first. Sometimes it's the concept or the overall idea, but very soon after that, it's got to be the character and it's got to be the relationship in the script. The relationship that forms between two or three characters in the script. Like without that, there's nothing really to write. You could have a novel, which is just about one person, but in the movie, visually, you need to see more than one person. So for the Buffett script, I kind of had this idea that since Warren Buffett was an outsider in the big Wall Street, he's from Nebraska, the big Wall Street sort of investing scene of the '90s or whatever, that he would sort of be like the one honest man that kind of comes into town, like the sort of Gary Cooper kind of cowboy that accidentally he became involved in this one investment company that he had a lot of money in that was, corrupt, and then was threatening to take his company down. So he had to kind of be the one honest man that kind of comes along and kind of begins to sort of detangle what's happening. So for me, it was the character, and it's usually the character's voice, and then it's usually right after that a key relationship that's going to define the story of the script. And without those, like I've had ideas that I've thought have been interesting or fun, but until I find you land on a character and you land on the key relationship that character is going to navigate over the course of the plot, that I can't really get into a script to write.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, I write short stories. I'm working on some novels.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to hear a little bit about your process in crafting a story, because
Okay.
I wonder if it might be very different from my own.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about your process too. For me, usually I have an idea. This is like sometimes sounds like a dirty word, but concept. I'm very big on concept. Um, if I have an idea and the concept resonates with me and I know it's kind of fun and kind of like, I think sometimes when you stumble along that good idea, it kind of rings inside of you like a bell. And you're like, oh yeah, that's really fun. And you kind of get excited about it. I know, like, the best stuff that I kind of write, it usually comes along because I'm like, I'd love to show that to this person. I'd love to show it to my friends that, like the same stuff that I like, or my wife, like, I just want this to exist because I want them to see what it's going to look like, right? That's good motivation to write stuff. So usually I kind of get the concept, and then if I, in the concept will intuit a certain set of characters, specifically a lead character. And usually when that happens, you can then begin to sort of define the relationship. Like I can talk about, a script that got me a little bit of attention, and got optioned, although I don't know what's going on with it right now, was uh, during the whole, you know, Trump years and Biden years and everything. I had this idea for a script called First Bro, which would be like the president's embarrassing younger brother. Like, I don't know if you.
I remember you
Okay,
telling me
yeah.
about this.
Like, I don't know if you. Bill Clinton had a younger brother named Roger Clinton, and Jimmy Carter had a younger brother too. So it was like, well, what if the president is like, it's very down the line, like amazing president, but he's sort of got this embarrassing younger brother, and it's even there at the within the concept. First Bro is the name of the character. So like, okay, I have this one character that's just going to be going to college forever, just hiding from his responsibilities. Obviously, you need a plot at that point, something that's going to be exciting. So it's like, okay, this could kind of be like a little bit of like a political sort of, espionage kind of thing. They put a hit on him, right? So you need a relationship to navigate, right? So you have this character who's the president's kind of free thinking, a younger brother hiding from responsibility. Well, as the character goes on this journey to kind of navigate or escape this political assassination, you need to tie them to another character and you have to generate some sort of conflict. So I'm like, well, who's going to generate the most kind of conflict? They're probably going to be with a Secret Service person, right? And for a while I tried to write it and I couldn't get much traction. But then when I was like, oh, the Secret Service agent is female. Like as soon as I flipped that, the whole script kind of came into being, and I had this sort of physical journey that they were trying to get from where the brother was to the president. So that's a physical journey. But at the same point, I knew the difference in character, that the brother would be the sort of free thinking, hiding from responsibility kind of character. Well, the female Secret Service agent would be very detailed, very sort of like on top of everything. And I knew like those two doing something together that was life and death would generate enough conflict, as they sort of traverse this, and then there's a mystery and stuff. So when I have those two things, I usually know, I can sort of develop, this concept. With the Buffett script, it was a little bit harder, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to write it without finding the key relationships. So for Buffett, he has a business partner named Charlie Munger, who's sort of his like, almost the person that Buffett himself looks up to. Also, he has a very interesting relationship with his wife, who was his ex-wife, and his current wife, whereas, his wife sort of, kind of, I don't want to say left him, but kind of went to San Francisco to just kind of live her own life, and sort of installed her best friend as his sort of like his new wife, and they eventually got married. So I was like, that's an interesting dynamic to explore, aside from the business thing, this idea of this woman that loved her husband but couldn't be married to him, and just sort of installed this, realized he needed someone to take care of him, and just kind of installed this new person in his life, and eventually they kind of wound up getting married. I'm like, okay, that's a very interesting dynamic to explore. And I think without those relationships, I don't think there would be anything to write.
I agree. But
Yeah.
that's really interesting. So, concept and character, obviously very important.
I think concept
I
character go hand in hand. Yeah.
I think so. I just think so. My process might be a little weird.
Okay.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
because most people I talk to, they don't do the process this way. So usually I will start with an emotion
Mm-hmm.
or a theme that I want to convey,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there build off the character and then concept.
Yeah. I think like that's sort of it's different, but it's there's a lot of similarities because one thing is like when I say character, there are some times where I'll have a character, but I can't write it. And then I found that if I can get a single piece of dialogue, sometimes from the character, a specific piece of dialogue, it's almost like the idea of Jurassic Park, they rebuilding the entire dinosaur from a single strand of DNA, that like in that DNA of that exchange is the entire character, and in the entire character is the entire movie. So I found that hitting on all that, and then once I get that piece of dialogue or that dialogue exchange, like I remember in the Buffett script, um, it was the idea for a scene where, Buffett had been criticized in the 90s for being too traditional. And he comes in his office and his partners are pushing him to be, invest more in technology. And he said he's not comfortable. And from that whole exchange, I was like, okay, well, this is the dynamic of their relationship. And I was able to kind of take apart almost like piece by piece the entire movie from that. And I found that when I can come up with that single defining line, I actually have a theory about movies is that the movies that have those famous sort of pop culture defining like one-liners, that one-liner actually is indicative of the entire movie. Like
Tears in Rain, Blade Runner.
yeah, that's a good one. The one I was thinking about is like Jaws. We're gonna need a bigger boat,
Okay, yeah.
right? So it's like not just a shark. I haven't exactly taken apart this concept yet, but the idea is it's not just a shark. It's the shark. It's the apex predator. So they're not just killing a shark. They're gonna need a bigger boat, right? Even something like Jerry Maguire, like Show Me the Money, right? Like Jerry Maguire has to show the people in his life like what his moral character is. So when, the Cuba Gooding Jr. character is yelling, "Show me the money," he's actually that's actually indicative of Jerry's entire sort of arc in the movie, is that he's got to show people what he's made out of. So I've thought about this a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're clearly well versed in film. You talked a little bit about comic books earlier. Is there an instance you can remember from early childhood where something, maybe a piece of media, maybe a story you wanted to tell, just kind of got you on this
Oh my
path?
God, yeah, totally. I remember my dad was like a teacher and he read a lot, and he was reading the Odyssey
Okay.
one summer. And I was like, "Can you tell me the story of the Odyssey?" And I guess my dad's actually a pretty good storyteller because he told me it with like this guy and he's running from the Cyclops and he's like, got to do all this stuff, and I was just like entranced with it. And I kind of became obsessed with the Odyssey. And the problem is that you can't really read it. It's like, as a kid,
Oh yeah.
you can't really like, it's just not fun to read. So like my dad found like comic books of the Odyssey and actually like these like
Okay.
recordings of these dramatizations of that. So that's something that really resonated with me. And it's kind of funny because like the thing that I'm working on right now, it's like everything kind of comes full circle. It's sort of an offshoot. I mean, I'll send it to you. You can see offshoot of that. But I think like, yeah, I mean the Odyssey is sort of like the first superhero, the uber superhero
Interesting.
movie. Yeah, so I guess my dad having to read that when I was a kid was lucky, and then I got obsessed with the Odyssey. Like I would like play like the Odyssey with my friends, and then
It's funny. I don't hear a lot of kids say that.
no,
That's pretty funny.
but there's also there's a bunch of other stuff. There's this comic book called ElfQuest that was really big, which was sort of a Lord of the Rings type of kind of thing about a group of elves and they're journeying together, and we would like play all that stuff, and then the normal stuff, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, James Bond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would credit a lot of my wanting to tell stories to Star Wars for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if we disagree on that, which movies are the best. Um, so you mentioned directing earlier. Was What was the shift that made you choose to go into screenwriting,
Right.
or do you still have some passion to pursue directing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like when I was a kid, I was also, like to draw a lot. So I like that, consider myself having a visual imagination, whatever that means. But yeah, when I got to college and even when I got sort of into working, I wanted to shoot short films. It was just almost impossible logistically to line up people on the weekend, shoot them. For me, it just became, well, here's something I can do. I can take my computer before work. I can go to a coffee shop and I can work out what I want to have happen, right? I can sort of go through and iterate this thing and create it here. And for me, that just was a little bit more user friendly than like, having to have the boom guy there, having to have, the gaffer there. Like,
100%.
yeah,
I found
the
myself
actors,
very
not that
similar.
any of that stuff is not important, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I found myself in very similar situations. I think the interesting thing is with writing, you are still very visual, at least in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just that when you put that out, it's probably not gonna come across the same way to other people.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it's nice too, just the idea of being able to, I don't know, anytime you want or you have free time, you can just sort of go back into this thing and sort of reiterate it and work on this idea. And it's, if you're shooting something, you have the time that the crew's there, you have the time the actor's there, you have the shots you need to get. Like, in writing, it's almost like the sky's the limit.
Yeah, you're just in your own little world when you're
Mm-hmm.
on that page.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it's like entrancing.
Yeah, yeah,
You know.
exactly. Yeah.
So can you tell me, were there any difficulties that you've had along the way on your screenwriting journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's just, oh, I mean, not that it's a constant struggle, but I mean, I think there are, whether it's finding time to, when I had a full time job, to write in the morning or having an idea that you felt like really works or you're excited about and not having a way in. I mean, I think the other thing too is there's this sort of pressure that kind of freezes you where people are going to look at it. And even then, that kind of happened where I had a script that got some buzz and it was being passed around. And they were like, okay, well, can you write this other thing? And I sort of ran into this bad writer's block that kind of went on for like almost 2 years. And I like read a lot about writer's block. And everybody I talked to, they were like, the only way through this writer's block is just to go through it. The only way through it is to finish this thing that you are working on, and that would actually kind of break it. And one of the biggest things that helped with that was like I began to get involved in improv in Los Angeles, and I never was an actor and have any interest in performing, but being in improv, the one thing that kind of taught me was that there is always a line. There's always an answer, right? If you're doing a scene um, in front of an audience, you can't just go up and have writer's block. There's always a way through, right? And that began to develop this idea that there is a way sort of through this stuff. The other thing that it really helped me do is most of the stuff you do in improv is so bad, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
It's
done it too.
yeah, exactly. It's so bad, anytime a friend asks you to go to their amateur improv show, people are like, I can go, right? Yeah. That really, it's just sort of a matter of like, sometimes you'd go out there and you'd be in a scene and you'd be like, the scene's going nowhere. I might as well make this the worst possible fucking scene I can, right? And that becomes very liberating, right? Because there's no pressure to make it good. And that I've found is probably one of the biggest things to get over the writer's block is to be like, let me just write the worst thing ever. Let me just write the dumbest thing ever, right? And that really helped me because, like, you can begin to sort of pull out. Once you have something down, you can begin to sort of craft it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've been there too.
yeah.
So when you were in this spot of kind of feeling like giving up,
Right.
How did you pull yourself out of it? I know you mentioned other people coming in.
Yeah, that was really hard. Not, you know, it was difficult because there's a huge level of frustration because you're kind of returning to the same thing, like almost Groundhog Day every day, just kind of pushing your way through it. I mean, I think luckily, like, I mean, my wife was very helpful in that because she sort of was like, you can do it, just get through it. And that sort of made me think, like, well, this person believes in me, you know, I don't want to let her down. Right. So that kind of made me feel like not giving up and I was able to push through it. And then, not even that last thing that I finished from pushing through that, the next maybe few things down the road were things that were better that I could send out that could get me some traction. So even then, you're kind of iterating, getting a lot of bad stuff out until you land on one thing that, you know, I think you kind of feel like, oh, okay, this is good. You know, I could send this out and circulate it.
Yeah, I think for me, community is one of the biggest things too.
Right.
You know, I'm kind of just starting my journey here
Mm-hmm.
with writing, and I think just building people who can encourage me or tell me maybe what I'm not doing so great
Right.
helps me to want to do better
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
eventually push that out
Yeah.
and share it.
I think like there's a huge, I mean, I think there's a huge thing between like either being stubborn or just being a complete fucking idiot. Because like the other thing was like, well, I don't want to do anything else with my life. So I might as well just keep trying to do this.
Yeah.
Because it was like, do I give up? Do I want to do anything else with my life? And you're like, no, all right. Even so, even the torture of sort of kind of like having the boulder fall back on you was better than the option of giving up. Right? That the idea that the
Sisyphus.
best, yeah,
Go back to
exactly.
Greek mythology.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That the best possible version of this was inspiring enough to go through all the difficulty to get to it, I think is like, because again, it comes back to the thing of like having an idea that you think is so cool or so interesting or so fun that you just can't wait to share with your friends.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of kept me going.
So, okay, you mentioned this is what you want to do with your life. When did you realize that?
I mean, probably like eighth grade.
Okay.
I think like I was like, I really like comic books, but then I also really like movies and I like music, and I was like, okay, well, that's movies are kind of a combination of all of this. So then that's kind of like when I was like, and I was like, I don't think I can really do much else. You know, I don't think I could be like a business person or a stockbroker or whatever. There's a while where I was like, oh, I could be a comic book artist, but I can never draw the same thing twice. So like, okay, that's gonna really hold me back.
So right now in this moment, how do you know it's your life call? Your life's calling.
I mean, I don't think you ever really do.
Yeah.
I think it's just the question is like, is this worth going through the difficulty or the pain to do it,
Mhm.
right? Um,
Seeing that finished product.
yeah, I
that
think
you're
yeah,
able to
exactly.
share.
Yeah, I think like is it worth the sacrifice of I don't know, not seeing friends or family or whatever enough to get this product out because you're excited enough
Yeah.
to share it with some people because you just think it's like I don't know, something that should exist. Right? I think like much
Yeah.
more than a life calling. That's probably because because it's like it could be writing stories for comic books too. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be movies. Right.
No, yeah, it can
Yeah.
be anything.
Yeah.
It's just something to share, maybe a message to convey.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's more sort of that's going to keep you going longer than feeling like it's your calling. Because if you feel like it's your calling, then that's a huge amount of pressure to put on yourself, and that probably would lead to some sort of block. Again, like if the for me the way through it is to kind of write the worst thing possible at any moment, but I feel like it's
Yeah.
my life calling. That's a huge amount of pressure there. But
Oh, for sure.
if I'm just more excited to show something to somebody, that's like that's like a good feeling to move towards.
Yeah, I think when I hit writer's block the most was when I tried to over analyze what that story would
Yeah.
mean for me when I put it out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
from the context of what can I share with this story?
Yeah.
That's usually what motivates me to sit down and try to really get something done that I think
Right.
would maybe, help someone
Yeah.
through a time or even just make someone laugh or something.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's just like you said about the being lost in creating on the page. That's like actually the writing part is just sort of like just almost like the reps of, I guess, the long, like, I don't know, like a marathon runner of just being lost in the hours and hours of
Yeah.
putting stuff down on the page is great, right? And then the next part is like, okay, well, I have all of this stuff. How can I chisel it down to get this to the point of like that I can share it with somebody? Because like that's the first part is just the energy or the fun of whatever, sitting down and writing it. And then the next part is the motivation to be like, okay, this has got some potential underneath here. Um, how can I get it to a place where someone could actually read and understand it? Right? I feel like those two things can get you past most blocks. But yeah, once you start thinking like, oh, what can this do for me or where can this go? That can really freeze you up because it's not actually something you can control, you know?
So tell me, do you have a personal philosophy for success when it comes to getting something out there or sharing
I
it?
mean, I don't know if I've like had the most amount of success in my life. I think like personal philosophy for getting something out there. I will say like there's this sort of idea of like, just write something good. Just write something good, right? I feel like that's a little bit of bullshit. I feel like the gatekeepers or whatever, love to say just write something good, right? Because it's their way of saying like, yeah, we know what's good, right? But I don't think that that's enough because the history of like the written word is filled with great books that just like Confederacy of the Dunces or something was a great book, but nobody read it when it was first circulated, or whatever you think of Harry Potter, right? Every place turned it down, right? So writing something good isn't enough, right? I think you have to have something that resonates with somebody, right? So that's like the concept. And I also think you have to have enough sort of energy. I think a lot of writing is transmuting energy, right? You're transmuting energy to the person that's reading it, right? Your passion, right? If you're bored writing it, they're probably gonna be bored reading it. But I think that that energy would be transmuted too when you get it out to somebody, right? So obviously, like, again, I'm not like the biggest Harry Potter fan, but I think we can all say that J.K. Rowling
It resonates with people.
was had energy behind that idea, and that energy. I mean, like the story I heard was that the publisher that picked it up, he didn't even read it. It was his daughter that read it. So obviously, that energy that she had for that project was transmuted to another young girl, right? Who the energy was enough where she said to her dad, "You have to read this." Right? So I think like that would be my
Like finding an audience, because I think I've been there too, where I want to see everyone love what I have to put out there,
right.
but not everyone will.
Yeah, again, I come back to this idea of like the friends I know and the people I know thinking, oh, they will like this idea. They will think this is cool, right? So I'm obviously like thinking of a handful of friends that I know, they'll get a kick out of this, right? And I think like if I think like that rather than like I have to make the next Titanic or whatever, something that like 750 million people will see that they'll like I don't think like that seems like it could be very creatively stopping. But knowing like, oh, my friend Niall likes this, he's gonna get a kick out of me doing this, or my friend Dan likes this, or my wife always thinks that this is funny. If I do something for those three people, at least I'm like on the way, and they're indicative of other people in the world too. So that's how I kind of think about it.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So is there any advice that you might share for someone who is wanting to become a writer professionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece of advice that I can like give, and this is actually something that my manager has kind of said publicly, is that like one of the biggest problems that they see with amateur writers or stuff that's not crossing over is the concept's not strong enough. Mm-hmm. Right? So occasionally there's somebody who's just so good that they could take a concept that's, you know, that's not particularly strong and they could just execute on it. But really, to get that person excited enough to keep reading, I think the concept has to be unique and resonant enough. And whatever that concept, whatever your definition of a good concept is, I mean, I guess that's taste based, but that concept has to be enough to get them to open up the file or whatever you send them to read it. Because it's like your family and your friends will read whatever stuff that you send them or whatever. Maybe, I don't know, they should. But like to get that professional who's at work, who's got stuff they need to read for themselves, that concept has to really make them want to click open that file. So I think working on that concept, finding out actually what a unique, good concept is that gets people excited is great. And then executing that concept, that's even better. You know, I'd say that's the biggest advice.
Okay, it's really interesting. So Eliot, right now, can you tell us about the story that you plan to continue writing for yourself moving forward?
Are you talking about like the story of my life?
Just your life. I thought I'd make it a little,
yeah,
poetic since we're talking about writing.
I mean, I think like the story of one's life should be like the story of like basically like every day, right? I mean, like you have to go and kind of like show up and work and be there. You know, it's interesting because like I've been trying to, I have a 2.5-year-old and I've been trying to balance this work with the other work that I kind of, because there's a strike going on, so I'm doing other sort of advertising and copywriting work, and then, you know, being there for my kid. And I heard somebody interview that talked about Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, right? I guess there was this thing where he had like 6 kids that died in childbirth. So he kind of said this thing about like he put his kid to sleep. I mean, this might sound a little bit dark, but you take what you want from it. Every time he put his kid to sleep, he would put them to sleep as if they wouldn't make it to the morning. And I kind of remember like, or now like when I put my daughter to sleep, like just be there for this time, right? With her, right? Then with my family. And then that even when I focus on writing, like be there as much as possible, do the best work I can in the moment, right? I can always fix it. So that's kind of would be my philosophy, right? Like to be there. I remember like I had this one time I had like this meeting that I was stressed about, and there was this guy that he was a priest that used to come to the coffee shop, and we would talk, and I'm not, you know, religious or anything, and I asked him like, I've got this meeting that was coming up, what should I do? I'm nervous about it. And he said, just keep the lantern at your feet. And that like has always resonated with me. You know, like if you hold the lantern up too high, you're walking in a dark forest at night, you're likely to trip, right? But if you keep it at your feet, you always see like what's right in front of you. I mean, granted, if there's like a bear or some sort of like, you know, like monster in the woods, you won't see it, but you'll see what's directly in front of you.
You can walk around it.
You can walk around it. So yeah, I would think like just again, you know, focusing on what's the immediate thing in front of me working, because I do think that the more energy you can bring to something, the more passion you can bring to it in that moment, that will carry through when somebody reads it. You know, and it's hard on a day-to-day basis because you're a different person. You know, I mean, that's something that like I think everybody struggles with is like, you know, you're a different person if you come up with an idea and it's going to take you a year and a half to write a book. You're going to be a different person by the end of that book. Yet that book has to seem like it's a piece of the whole. So I think just focusing on the work at hand on that day is probably the best philosophy.
Staying present.
Yeah, I guess staying present. Yeah. I mean, trying to stay inspired is huge because like I said before, like you want that passion that you're bringing to that thing in that moment. Like you're writing it on that day, Tuesday, whatever, November the 5th, could be being read 30 years from now, right? You want that person who reads that 30 years from now to feel something, right? Whatever it
Kind of
is.
have that window into your soul that you were trying to express.
Yeah, or a window into just some feeling. Because if there's no feeling behind it, right, there's no reason for it to exist, right? So I think that that feeling, like, I don't know, whatever singer songwriter, we were talking about country music from the 50s singing about heartbreak in the 50s, listening to that today on your Spotify streaming phone thing, that heartbreak still resonates because they were able to capture it. So whatever that is that you want to capture, that idea that you think is interesting, to bring yourself as much as you can to write it in that moment, that it will carry through to a later date when somebody will look at it.
I love that. That's really, yeah, that's very, very insightful.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah,
I
think
mean,
it's very
hopefully,
insightful. Uh,
bring something to it.
well, Elliot, it was awesome chatting with you,
Yeah,
talking about all this.
of course.
Before we wrap up,
Uh-huh.
could you
There's no way to find me.
recommend? There's no way to find you, but could you recommend 3 books,
Yes, I can recommend 3 books.
whether they're for writing or
Yeah,
fiction
yeah,
or
yeah. I mean, I think like the thing about writing books is like there's for any number of writing books, there's probably 1 or 2 pieces of good advice you can get from any number of one. I mean, any number of those books. I mean,
Well, just your favorite books. They can be any.
okay.
Just what are 3 books
Right.
that you
Well,
want people to read?
the book that I read when I was younger that kind of resonated the most for me was this book called Billy Bathgate by this writer called E.L. Doctorow. That's about this young kid that gets involved with this gangster, and I just loved it. And I wound up reading everything else by them. Um, there's this other book called The Denial of Death, and I think it's by Ernest Beck. Have you ever heard
I've
this?
been wanting to get there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
I'm reading some Nietzsche right now, and I plan to do that.
yeah, for me, like, that is the book that just explains circumstances of what the world are like the most clearly of any book I've ever read. I mean, and I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, I love The Great Gatsby when I read it.
Yeah.
Read that every couple of years. Writing, that's just great. Yeah, those are 3
Yeah,
good books you
good
could start
story.
with. Yeah.
All right, Elliot. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
And yeah, till next time.
Yeah. All right.